Hello, my name is Carl Schoening of SSC Radio Solutions of Lawo here in Rastatt. This video is a part of a series of videos on how-to topics that we believe that you will find very interesting and hopefully most useful.
Hello, my name is Konstantin Evers and I'm an application engineer in the radio SSE team at Lawo, and we are going to show you today how to set up a remote connection to your studio-based Ruby and VSTool console from a fixed remote location.
So let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail. What we have are two locations. We have a radio station studio and we have a remote location. So what's happened now to you is that due to COVID or other applications or disaster recovery, for instance, you now have to be isolated from your studio itself. How do you go about setting this up in a simple and easy way so that you can easily move yourself away from the studio and set yourself up in a remote location without too much trouble and too much problem? So we're going to show you how to do that, in particular by using the VSTool application, where with VSTool you can now remote access to your studio and control your console from a remote location. So with these next sections of videos, I'm going to, for instance, show you the studio itself, and then what we're going to do is we're going to then show you also the remote location. So let's have a look at the studio in reality.
What we have here is a fully functional studio with a Ruby console and VSTool. We are using a playout system, in this case MareList, which is controlled via Amber Plus. The local microphone is functional. We can see the modulation on the meters in the VSTool. And we have in front of us two playout sources. Player 1, controlling the playout system, and player 2. Again, the control takes place at the moment via Amber Plus.
You have now seen the studio, so let's take a little bit more detailed look at what you could see at the remote location and how that might look like. And here at the remote location, to be able to remotely control your studio, we need the following. A very important aspect is the network connection between the studio and the remote location. This will depend very much on what infrastructure is in place and available to you. Typically, a dedicated VPN connection is used and requires at least 2 megabits per second of connectivity speed. The next aspect is, of course, a cloned copy of the VSTool configuration that is running in the studio. And this here is installed and running on a local computer, as we can see over here. It's a clone copy of the VSTool that's running in the studio itself. So you would have seen that when Konsti showed you that a bit earlier on whilst he was in the studio. We also have a local I/O device, such as this USB-based Focusrite device over here with microphone inputs and headphone output connections. This gives us the connectivity to our headset unit with microphone and headphone applications. Then an important part of it as well is a codec to carry the audio between the studio and this location. And for this application here, we are using the Lucy Live. In addition, very important is to be able to actually view what's happening in the studio itself. And here we're using TeamViewer to actually get a view of what is actually occurring on the VSTool machine in the studio itself. We see a view of the playout system, the MareList, and as a bonus, we can actually also see what's happening on the VSTool that's occurring in the studio itself. So when we see what's happening in the VSTool of the studio, we can then get a confidence of what is happening when we are sitting remotely in our destination. So you've had a look at the studio, and now let's look at more detail about the remote location in summary. What we saw there were the following applications. We had VSTool, which gave us the remote access through to the power core into the studio. It gave us a visual representation of what the console looks like and gave us remote control as well over the console itself. We had a USB device that be able to provide the headphone and mic audio so that you could be able to present on air and listen to the program return or a mix minus return, depending on how you want to have your setup and what your users are used to in their remote location. We also then have the Lucy connection, which is carrying that audio, basically the microphone back through to the studio and the program audio coming from the studio back to the remote location, so that you can actually have a full interface into the system from not only from a visual point of view, but also from an audio aspect too. And of course, an important part of it as well is also the visual confidence and the visual aspects of the team viewer, giving you a view into what is actually happening in the studio and seeing what is occurring, particularly on your playout system, and giving you the confidence to see if you have VizTool on the same machine as well, that you can actually see what's happening on VizTool at that location too. So all those together gave you now the remote location. And how does this look at the studio end?
To close the loop, we return to the studio to check the connections required here. First, the codec receiving and sending audio to and from the remote location, as mentioned, Lucy Live. Second, to interface the codec, we use Relay to provide the audio as a Ravenna stream. Relay is already being used as a virtual sound card for the playout system, and we simply add Lucy connections. Third, the TeamViewer application to provide the remote visual of what is happening in the studio.
Thanks, Consti. So in summary, what we saw is a Lucy connection, which carried the audio from the remote location here to the studio. This, of course, as you remember, carried the microphone and program audio. We saw Relay, which then interfaced Lucy as a Ravenna stream into the system. Relay, of course, in this case was also being used as the playout virtual sound card. We saw the TeamViewer application, which allowed the remote location to actually view and connect to the studio to see what was actually happening. And of course, we mustn't forget our usual stalwarts, the playout system, in this case, MailList, and of course, carrying it all for us, VizTool. How do we make this all happen?
Let's look at this process in greater detail. In the studio. On the console, we have the used connections for microphone, several local inputs, hybrid sources, playout system, and so on. What we need now for our remote production is the microphone source from the remote location. This is transferred as a Ravenna stream to a pool source. The Ravenna pool source allows you to dynamically assign any stream from the network to a source in the console. We do that now for our remote microphone. So therefore, I simply step through a folder structure, signal structure, and assign the remote microphone. It is tuning in and directly connected. In VizTool, we have a virtual console to display the surface. This is now an absolute parallel control of the physical console.
And back here at the remote location. Now what Consti showed you in the studio was how to control the console and the sources and inputs that you have available to you over there. You might recognize the view that you're now seeing here in VizTool. It is basically a reproduction of what you saw in the studio itself, except that here now we're actually at the remote where we actually have the source of the microphone that Consti assigned to the surface. So using a headset with a microphone attached, we are now able to provide, for instance, the microphone audio necessary to be able to talk on air, and we also via the headset able to listen to the audio that's coming back from the console, basically your program return. So if I now tap my microphone over here, you see that it's now responding, and you can see it appearing in the VizTool screen over here. Now, just to give you an indication as well, via our remote the team viewer aspect, we are seeing the same sort of things as well over there. So I'm seeing it's a different instance of VizTool. These are two different instances of VizTool, but they're both showing the same information because they're clones and they're both connecting to the same power core. So I'm back to my mixer over here in my remote location. I now can talk through the microphone and have that appearing now as a source in my console. And when I play something on the headphones, at least on the console itself, I'll hear that through on the headphones. So an example, we had Ravenna 2 and 3 as the playout system. So I will hit play over here, and the audio now appears. It might be a little loud. I can do level control and things like that as well. I can reduce the level. But I'm actually now via the VizTool that is now here in the remote location, sending a signal through to the power core, which is in the studio location, and telling it to now send an Emma Plus trigger to the playout system to now actually play. And if we have a look through our team viewer remote aspect, I can now go in and in theory also have a look and see I can actually now have a view of the playout system in the remote location, at least in the studio location from this remote location over here. And you see that I'm actually mimicking the operations when I'm looking at it over here. So I'm looking at, then I can see now the playout system playing out its music over here. And I can then, via my studio over here, I can now segue between. So if I wish to go on air, I can now bring this volume down here as far as audio is concerned. I can now bring my microphone up, and I can now be talking on air over there and coming through on the speakers and in the studio and actually going on air itself. And if I want to, I can then do a segue between the different channels and actually control the show completely from here in this remote location. This is now, of course, the important thing to remember here is, of course, that we are now controlling the console via Emma Plus, so that any control that's happening within the VizTool environment is being relayed through to the hard disk playout system or the playout system in the studio via the power core which is residing there in the studio. So we've given you now the ability to be able to now see and access your console remotely and be able to actually view your playout system as well and control it, and as well turn your microphones on and off and actually have a complete show as you would normally do, except in this case now in your corona-free isolation environment.
So now you know.
Welcome to Lawo Lounge, Lawo's weekly live program bringing you product tips, application insights, new product introductions, customer interviews, interactive Q&As, and more. Don't miss out this unique opportunity to stay connected.